Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. This week we're on episode 137, which I know I say it every week, but it just amazes me every time I say it that we're still here and we're still clocking up the numbers. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, in Portree, in Fort William and in Wick. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards the work of the Highland Archive Service, then we're really grateful for that. I'm very well aware that financial times are hard, and you will be aware, of course, that has an impact on services like ours. So if you're able to take towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. I'm coming this week to look at the story of one person, and very interlinked with that, the story of one town, Nairn. This is the story of Dr. Grigor, who was commonly and is still commonly referred to as the father of Nairn. And as I said at the end of last week, I'm looking forward to it because I'm conscious that I don't often focus specifically on Nairnshire, so looking forward to this. I might also go over, because it's quite a long and detailed story, but I'll try not to. Now, to tell this story this week, I will be using this book, written by, if I move it so you can see it, there we go, written by Isabel Ray and John Lawson. And the reason that I can tell this story using a published book, which obviously I don't usually do using secondary source material, is because all the research notes that were created in the writing of this book are held at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, as well as the original material that was used for that research. So everything that came together to find out about his life, any original documents that could be sourced and that were available to be collected, were put into the archive along with this book. And so it's much easier, it's quite a pleasure for me to write something that I can just go to a secondary source and then double check it against our source material. The collection of documents that we hold relating to this book is D281, Dr. Grigor of Nairn collection, which covers the years 1801 to 1994 when this biography was published. So why is John Grigor noted? Why is he notable? Why is he still a fairly well-kent name in Nairn? He was born on the 16th of September 1814. He was the youngest child of Robert Grigor, who was a writer to the Signet, so a legal profession, and his wife Clementina Cameron. And the family were settled in Elgin in Moray, so just over the county boundary from Highland into Moray. John, as you'll see as I go through this story, he had many hugely successful positive moments, but he had waves of personal trauma and upset. And the first blow of his life was to come when he was just 2 years old, the death of his mother at the age of 27. And that would be followed within the year by the death of his oldest brother, Alexander. So by the age of just 3, he's already lost his mother and one of his siblings. And in the biography, Ray and Lawson note that the impact of these losses on John Grigor's father, Robert, was substantial, as you would expect. But it was so substantial that it led to periods of mental ill balance and distress for his father throughout the remainder of his life. So from a very young age, John Grigor was surrounded by loss, by illness, and the impact of both physical and mental distress. And that becomes really relevant as we go through his story. After school, he went on to Aberdeen's Marischal College, following in his family's footsteps and his family's wish that he should study law like his father had done and his brother had done. And I wanted to read from the biography what happened next when he went to study law. However, the plan was blighted by one of John's early letters home. Robert's reply to his brother on the 12th of November 1829 clearly summed up the dismay of the family that John Grigor wasn't enamoured with the study of law. So his brother said, "I am quite astonished, and every other person who has heard it from you, for disliking Aberdeen and the college." Mr. Morrison says you need not write to him until you like it as much as you at present dislike it. If you pay right attention to your studies, as I am afraid you are not, I'll become bound that you will not dislike it any more. I hope you've never been set down in the class yet. If you were, just consider the affront. And Mr. Morrison that he refers to there was a family friend and possibly their school teacher. So the brother is saying, you know, we're all mortified that you don't like Aberdeen, that you don't want to study law. What are you thinking about? Why are you not working hard enough? And it goes on to say, in fact, the family had misjudged John. The young man had been attending to his studies, but had decided that they were the wrong studies for him. John Grigor was demonstrating at early a lifelong ability to make up his own mind about things and to stick to his decisions. To his admirers, it was the virtue of decisiveness. To others, it was sheer stubbornness. He had looked at the law and found that it was not for him. He saw his future not as a lawyer, but as a physician, and the best school of medicine at that time was in Edinburgh. He won his point, and an amicable solution was found. He remained at Aberdeen until the end of his first year, taking the arts course including a grounding in Latin and Greek, and applied for a place at Edinburgh University for the term beginning November 1831. And so he found himself following the profession of his choice, undertaking his medical training and practice in both Edinburgh Medical School and also in Elgin, because he worked for a time at Dr. Gray's Hospital, which was then really quite new, but is still there today. And D281, the collection that we hold, contains records of this period. So there are certificates showing his attendance at lectures and exams, copies of registers evidencing the fact that John Grigor had diplomas in anatomy, in surgery, in pharmacy. And in addition, there are records of his apprenticeship that he served under the doctors John Paul and James Stephen. And all of those give valuable evidence of the huge amount of experience and training and knowledge that this young man was gaining. At this point, he's not yet 20, but he's already, as I say, he's already confronted personal loss and trauma, had to support his father through mental health trauma, and has started to study law and has decided that instead he wants to be a physician. So a huge amount already to have undertaken by that age. At around this time, his brother Robert, who had gone on and trained as a solicitor, set sail for Jamaica to run a sugar plantation. If you're interested in finding out more about the Highlands and that connection to slave plantations, slave run or operated plantations in the Caribbean, then Learn with Lorna 25 has some information about that. But the leaving of his brother Robert to go to Jamaica left John at that age of under 20 with the responsibility of their father in his condition, in his kind of failing mental health state. There were other members of the family, but John, as his leaning took him into medicine, became largely responsible. On graduating from the university, Grigor applied for and accepted a job as assistant ship's surgeon on the Lord Lowther, which was owned and captained by Captain Alexander Grant. Now, the Lord Lowther was chartered by Jardine and Matheson, who were a substantial company which carried opium and cotton and tea and other materials between, particularly in and around India and China. The ship had a crew of 170, and what I thought was interesting, the crew included 170, including bandsmen. And Jardine and Matheson still exist in a slightly different format. There's really interesting detail in the collection and in the biography about this period of Dr. John Grigor's life. There's note about the prep done by his family and friends, the inducements to write. That seems to be quite a common thing. They quite often are saying to him, you know, please remember to write to us, don't, or you haven't written again for ages. They take quite offence at this. The fact that they had studied, the family came together and studied a plan of the ship so that they might understand where John was going to be sleeping and living. And it just really struck me as such a thing that we would absolutely still do. If you found someone was going on a long voyage, you would absolutely still go, well, let's have a look at where you're going and where are you sitting on the, where are you sleeping on this boat and what's your job going to consist of and where are you going to be? Let me try and visualise you. And I thought that was really noticeable and notable. Now, John Grigor spent 2 years on this ship from 1835 to 1837, and it was while he was away that the next wave of tragedy hit him, and it always seems to come in twos for him. His sister Barbara died after years of weak health, and she was just 24, and that was shortly followed by the death of his beloved Aunt Margaret at the age of 39, and she had kind of stood in as a mother for him after his mother had died. So having had those two losses at a very young age, in his 20s he gets this next wave of bereavement, and he's not even there to be with the family. We have correspondence from this period written to and from John to his family and friends. Particularly he was supported by his uncle Patrick Cameron, from his mother's side, who was a great support both financially and kind of emotionally, and writing to him and just being there for him. And this period reveals, these letters and correspondence and the biography reveals the success of his work aboard ship, keeping the vast majority of his crew not only alive but healthy, and also gaining experience in a wide range of illnesses and fevers and treatments, and of course developing a range of people skills of dealing with a range of different people, which would become completely invaluable to him as a GP. Amazing to think that by the age of 23 he had travelled across the world, he had got his medical qualifications, he had studied under leading surgeons and professionals of his time, he had become personally affected by and had also learned to support and care for a parent with crumbling mental health. He had lost his mother and the aunt who had stepped in for his mother, and also 2 of his siblings, and as I say, not yet 23. After finishing his 2 years at sea, Dr. Grigor returned home, and there was no role for him in Elgin where the family was settled, but there was a position instead found for him as a general practitioner in Nairn, about 20 miles away, and that's what takes him out of Murray and over into the Highland area that we look after. The previous incumbent in Nairn had suddenly died, and the role was offered to Dr. Grigor, where he started in 1838. I wanted to read a little extract to you that talks about how he might have felt and how the community might have felt about this move of his. On the Lord Lowther, he had learned how to cope with the varied personalities of his friends and patients, a community isolated from the outside world for long periods, dependent on their surgeon for their health, even their survival. Nairn was to be his new ship, and he had much to learn about its personalities, its leaders, and its politicians. The people of Nairn saw a sturdy, open-faced young man, still sunburned from his travels, always ready with a smile and a pleasant word, and a good listener. As a physician, he was caring, attentive and hard-working, and he came recommended. But if he had still to earn their trust, to what kind of town had he chosen to entrust his career? And the biography goes on to detail the condition of Nairn at the time that Dr. Grigor moved in, and also the perceived condition. It was, of course, a royal borough, and it had been a royal borough of some 5 or 6 centuries by this point, with a history obviously stretching back much further than that. And it had declined over, it had been a royal borough, had had a substantial amount of influence, but it had declined over the last recent years, leading Johnson and Boswell on their tour of the Highlands to describe it as a miserable place in a state of miserable decay. But by the 1830s and 40s, things were apparently looking up, with people like Provost Isaac Ketchen, who's another key name in Nairn's history, on the town council, and changes were happening. In the second statistical account, the 1845 statistical account written by Reverend James Grant, who was a friend of Dr. Grigor's, he wrote this, and this was written at a time where the population of Nairn, the borough and the surrounding area, was around 3,300. And this is how he described it. The borough of Nairn has not much increased in size or population during the last 20 years. The only increase is in the fishing town, occasioned by the prosperity attending the herring fishing, when the whole of the male fishing population, numbering perhaps 150, besides the boys, go with their boats in the herring season to the Caithness coast, where they remain for 6 weeks, and on average bring home from 50 to 100 pounds each man, which constitutes a great source of wealth to the town. An academy was erected by public subscription some years ago, the ground being the gift of the late Captain James Rose, RN, who, besides several large donations during his life, bequeathed his dwelling house and a considerable sum of money to the institution. A small pier was erected some years ago at the mouth of the River Nairn, which has since been much injured by floods and an accumulation of sand driven in by the sea. There are 3 branches of different banks in the borough: the National, the British Linen Company and the Caledonian. Gas has of late been introduced into the borough and promises to be of great benefit to the inhabitants, both in their private dwellings and shops and in lighting the streets. The public street, having been a rough causeway, is now macadamised and much levelled, but some inconvenience is felt in very dry weather from the increased quantity of dust. There is an excellent well-kept hotel in the borough, at which 3 public coaches stop each day. There is a temperance society which promises to be productive of good. The number of poor is around 120 to 130. Number of families in the parish belonging to the established church is 730. Number of dissenting or seceding families, so who have joined the Free Church, about 100, 1 Episcopalian family and 1 Roman Catholic. And in a way you're maybe wondering, why am I saying all that when that's not to do with Dr. Grigor? But it's context, and you'll know if you have listened to me over these years that context is one of my most used words, just to understand the town that he was coming into. So you can see there the state of the town. And incidentally, that donation to the academy, Nairn has been blessed with several really generous benefactors, including Dr. Grigor, as we'll see. Within a couple of years, Grigor was well established in the town, and he had obviously started to build that trust that he searched for. And I was really interested to read in the biography that one friend described Dr. Grigor as open-minded and free of bias. Another described him as having a remarkable freedom from narrowness of any kind, which I thought was just the most wonderful character reference. That's what I'm hoping for when I am gone, that someone will say that. The 1830s and 40s saw challenges for doctors as waves of cholera and typhus struck, and Nairn was badly hit with these as well. But what could have been a huge tragedy, and was a huge tragedy, was turned round quickly for Nairn, because fundraising began to establish the Nairn Town and County Hospital, the Fever Hospital, and Dr. Grigor was central to that. It was a triumph. Within 5 years it had been built and opened entirely by donation and spearheaded by a group including Isaac Kitchen and Dr. Grigor, determined to ensure that Nairn was well served in medical institutions. It was also in the 1840s that Dr. John Grigor married on the 21st of January 1845 to Jane McInnes, and they were both aged 30. And they would remain in Nairn together for the next 40 years. But hard on the heels of that joyful occasion was to come again a wave of tragedy. John's sister Clementina died in childbirth at the age of 37. Again, showing John the importance of good medical care, and then influencing his career in that he could see the benefit of having good medical care and support. Are there deaths that could be avoided? Are there illnesses that could be avoided? But also, from a personal point of view, not only bereaving him again of a sibling, but leaving him in sole charge of his father, who came to live with him. Although, as the biography said, really quite I was really moved by the wording of it. The biography said, "The move would have made little difference to the old man, now living for much of the time in his own world anyway." Now, the late 1840s and 1850s saw Dr. Grigor start to prosper and become heavily involved in public affairs. He was supporting the cleaning and redeveloping of the slaughterhouse, and Shambles area, which were right in the middle of the town, with the waste products and blood creating a health hazard. It wouldn't be moved until some years later, but Dr. Grigor was already really strongly advocating for the benefits of public health and the way that all of these sorts of things can have an impact on public health. He was undertaking an MD degree in the University of Aberdeen. He was purchasing tracts of land in Nairn, and he had moved to a bigger house on the high street with a cook, a housemaid and a groom. So you start to see his success building. He was also writing and publishing in journals at this point. So for instance, the London Journal of Medicine, in which he proclaimed the success of the Nairn Hospital and encouraged people to donate towards its work. In 1851, a group of 163 people contributed to a testimonial for Dr. Grigor. Such was his impact on the community that he served. There was a gathering held in the Lowes Hotel in which many of those who had donated came together to express, and this is a quote, "the deep sense entertained by the whole community of his professional ability and personal worth, his unwearied perseverance and his assiduity in the discharge of his laborious duties, and the deep interest so generally felt for his future welfare." Quite a thing for so many people to contribute to. And they gave him, and this is all solid silver from Garrard's in London, an elaborately decorated Elizabethan epergne, which is a kind of huge table centrepiece with a bowl with radiating dishes coming off it. So it's quite substantial. Solid silver coffee pot, solid silver cream ewer, solid silver sugar basin and fish knife and fork with engraved messages on them. So you can really get a feeling of how much he was valued by the town. It was in the following year that he would write an article which maybe if you Google him or search him is one of the things most strongly associated with his name that will come up. An article about a case of supposed spontaneous combustion of a man near Nairn who was a heavy drinker. It was a controversial theory, and he knew that as he wrote it. He said that, this is something that is going to provoke controversy and comment. But he was writing about the possibility, and that was something that was being discussed at the time, that if someone was kind of heavily soaked in alcohol, effectively, could they just spontaneously combust? I'm not going to go into the whole story, but it's interesting just as something if you want to follow it up, but also interesting because the publication of that article would have made his name known much more widely than in and around Nairnshire. In 1853, Grigor extended his involvement in local affairs by his election as a town councillor. Carrying on the pattern of his life, as I've said it several times as I'm talking, he would be then visited by a wave of another two sorrows the following year. The death of his last remaining sibling, Robert, at the age of 41, and the death of his father at the age of 83. And Dr. and Mrs. Grigor would have no children of their own, and his sister Clementine, if you remember Clementina, she died in childbirth. I think that is the only child that came from that family. So by this point he's lost all of his siblings and his parents. The mid to late 1800s saw huge changes across Britain in technology, in transport, in communications, and Grigor was keen to promote the opportunities that developments like these could bring. So things such as the railway. He saw that the railway could have a huge impact on Nairn. His practice was booming, and he and his wife had moved to their newly built Wellington villa. They were also building at this point various other properties. Dr. Grigor's attention was focused as well as on his medical practice, which as I say was substantial, but also his focus really was on the development, improvement and promotion of Nairn. He was fighting at this time for a clean water supply, a battle that went on for a long time, where he really strongly felt that public health demanded a clean water system. He was campaigning to promote Nairn as a healthy holiday destination for visitors, saying that it had the climate, it had the sea, it had the potential for bathing. And he was pushing for repairs and improvements in roads, in amenities, in building works in the town. In 1858, he finally succeeded in that long-held aim that he'd had of relocating the slaughterhouse out of the centre of the town. He was a convener of the Shambles Committee, the Shambles being the area where the butchers gathered. This gave him the opportunity to promote something for the newly created gap that it had left, and he suggested a marine family hotel, and the idea was so popular that the whole area was let to Grigor on loan. In the end, the hotel wasn't built there, but it was built on the links in Nairn. And if you look it up, you'll certainly see images of the Marine Hotel. And all of these discussions were quite controversial. And Grigor regularly clashed with people who didn't want development in the town. And that's a theme right across everything he does, is that there is this battle, as there always is, between people who want progress and development and change and people who want things to stay as they have been. The new hotel, eventually when it was built, was met with enthusiastic praise. And all the while, Grigor had moved on. He was now elsewhere in the town. He was on the committee for the Nairn Savings Bank. He was calling and advocating for a telegraph station in Nairn. He was speaking out about the need for a poorhouse. He was leading Nairn's Burns centenary celebrations. He was part of the committee which organised the ball and the banquet for 2000 on the return of the 18th Highlanders from India. He was driving gala days and events, and constantly he was encouraging development and promotion of Nairn and the surrounding area. The land that he had been leased when the slaughterhouse was relocated, he turned it into a market. And the biography says, the local paper commented that Grigor was bringing the community under another debt to his public spirit. It was a classic Grigor scheme, combining town planning and public health, introducing a service to locals and visitors, and earning the originator a return on his investment. And all of those things you can see across his work. Now, I mentioned that Grigor often clashed heads and caused controversy, particularly in his time in the council. And this seems to have been the case in 1859 and 1860, when an elderly lady died, leaving Grigor her substantial property, Larkfield House, and making him her residual legatee. He was also the only remaining executor, because all other executors to her will pulled out. The biography goes on to kind of speculate, would the locals have thought, well, that's absolutely fair because he was a huge support to her, he was always there helping her and supporting her, or would they have gone, oh, that's a bit questionable, that's a bit Agatha Christie. So there seems to have been controversy around this, especially around the fact that he was the only remaining executor as the others pulled out. But regardless of this, Dr. Grigor was elected provost, so leader of the council, in November 1860, by this point at the age of 46. His time as provost was tumultuous. There were passionate supporters. He had, throughout his career, hugely passionate supporters who backed his every decision and said that he was responsible for creating Nairn as it was becoming known as the Brighton of the North, or the Blackpool of the North. He also was always had passionate opposers, deriding his decisions, the fact that he wanted things his own way, that he was so driven. A real divide between progressives and those who wanted no change. And it all came to a climax around the subject of the siting of a gun battery, and that went on to be a long and bitter divide. It had started before he became provost, and it led to bitter arguments within the council, and a feud particularly with another stubborn and opinionated councillor, Colonel Findlay. So his time was not smooth. And fed up of this constant argument, and it's funny, I wrote this, of course, before we heard yesterday's announcement on the news, but interesting that he said he was fed up of the constant argument, and he was fed up of people using him, either passionately supporting him regardless or passionately opposing him regardless. And so he retired from being provost after only a few months. Despite a petition signed by the majority of the electorate, many of the non-electorate, all of the ministers in the borough, and many of the volunteer force asking him not to. And the petition, signed by so many hundreds of people, started from the time that you first entered into your duties as a councillor, a new era of prosperity has dawned on this place. The press across the northern counties expressed their disappointment that he was stepping back from politics. The Forest Gazette said, "We cannot but regard this step as a public loss to the community of our sister borough. Dr. Grigor has done much for the prosperity of Nairn, and the friends of the good town cannot but lament the unhappy discussions which have resulted in the withdrawal of Provost Grigor from public office." The biography says, Grigor must have been relieved to put behind him the strife of the council arena. He had learned the hard way that his temperament was not suited to the perennial arguments. His inclination was to decide what to do and to do it. He admired initiative and enterprise and had little time for posturing and the pompous. His priorities throughout his life were those of a physician. The health and well-being of his people came first. In 1862, the hospital he had been so central to forming noted how much credit is due to him for his untiring zeal for the care and relief of patients and for his constant gratuitous services. Moving on into the late 1850s, 60s and 70s, Grigor was central to the setting up of other institutions, as well as always with his medical practice in the background. At this point he was central to the setting up of Nairn Literary Society Library and Nairn Museum, both of which are still going strong. He gave lectures on the history of Nairn and on geology and botany and astronomy and a wide range of other sciences and information. He was described as having no professional equal in this part of the country. In 1863 he became the public vaccinator and also a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, writing pieces for them. He recorded the first cup markings in the north of Scotland at Clava Cairns. So again, that broad sweep of interests, which is just something I admire so much in anybody who doesn't have that narrow focus, but who can look broad and look long at subjects and how they interlink. It was also around this time that Dr. Grigor started travelling, particularly travelling the continent, visiting Rome and meeting the Pope in the company of no less a person than Grant of the Nile. And it was because he was with Grant of the Nile that the Pope asked to meet them. Also, apparently he dragged Grant round the hospitals of Italy because, as that extract said, he was first and foremost a physician and he wanted to see how hospitals were run in Italy. And he became, completely understandably in my opinion, utterly besotted with Italy from that day on. A passion that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Eventually he spent half a year in Nairn and half each year in Rome, again practicing medicine, so he had a medical practice in both, and he encouraged his Italian patients to come to Nairn for the healthy climate. 1863 and 64 was a busy period for him, and not all good. He was sued for damages in a case of child murder. Child murder being when someone has had a child and then concealed the birth of that child, often because they are a single mother. The court found in his favour that he hadn't done anything wrong. He had made a mistake, as opposed to anything willfully wrong. He'd made an error, but it caused him a huge amount of distress. After an accident that he had in 1867, where he was, I think he was thrown from a horse and carriage, and severely injured his leg. It was after this that Grigor decided to retire from general practice. However, his attention remained focused on Nairn. He was championing and was the chairman for the new public hall to be built. He arranged for an ornamental seat to be built on the links, which is still there. He was behind the creation of Nairn swimming baths, which apparently were among the very best in Britain at the time that they opened, and there was a huge elaborate opening ceremony for them with balls and orchestras playing. And he was a director of Nairn Academy. He was an elder in Nairn Parish Church. He was lecturing and speaking about history and science, particularly around Nairn, around the history and science of Nairn. By the 1870s, everything he had hoped for was coming to pass. There was a huge influx of people to Nairn, leaders in the area. There were housing developments, many of which he was behind, and he had built Castellamare, an Italianate house in Nairn. Interesting there that that kind of dual aim, that he's increasing the number of visitors coming. So he wants to bring visitors into Nairn, but it's because he wants the traders and the local businesses and so on to benefit from it, as well as those who are coming. In 1881, after 12 years, the Grigors stopped their habit of spending the winters in Italy and devoted all of their time to Nairn, promoting the literary society and scientific lectures and so on. Dr. Grigor passed away in October 1886 at the age of 72, and his wife Jane died 1 year later. When Dr. Grigor died, the newspapers described his funeral as the sorrowing of fully 2,000 people, the largest ever seen in Nairn, and the route was absolutely packed. There was a guard of honour by the Kirk Session and the Town Council. The shops were all shut, blinds were closed, the town bell and the parish church and the free church bells all rang for the funeral. He was buried in a beautiful spot in the cemetery, and I found this really moving. The area that he was buried in had been allocated for planting. It was already, the council had already decided what was happening to that. It was such a beautiful part of the cemetery that it was allocated for planting. But the cemetery board gave it free of charge to Dr. Grigor's wife to acknowledge, it says, to acknowledge the feeling of the town, that it was of such importance to the town that he should have this beautiful site. His will left over £24,000. His first priority was to look after his wife Jane and his family, but then, and this is quite long and I'm aware I'm running over, but I think it's really, really important to share with you. Then came the gifts to his favourite child, the town of Nairn. The first group of legacies payable within 12 months. £400 to the school boards of the parishes of Aldern, Ardclach and Codder to establish bursaries to enable poor boys of each of those parishes to attend Nairn Academy for 3 years. £200 to the directors of Nairn Academy to purchase annual prizes. £50 to each of the parishes of Aldern, Ardclach and Codder to be invested and the interest distributed among the poor. £400 to be invested and the interest paid annually to confirmed invalids, particularly young persons resident in Nairn. £200 to the trustees of the Nairn and County and Town Hospital. £50 to the Nairn Meal and Coal Fund. £20 to the Nairn Clothing Society. £150 to the Provost and the Magistrates of Nairn for the fund for assisting in keeping and repairing the links. £100 to the Indian Medical Missionary Society of Edinburgh and to the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. £100 to the fund for increasing the small livings of the clergy of the established church, an acknowledgement of the poor rewards earned by many country ministers. So those were to be paid immediately, but after his wife died, he had also put in place that after she had gone, this was how the remaining money was to be spent. £2,000 to be invested and the interest to be applied annually among the poor natives of the town or county of Nairn. £2,000 to the directors of Nairn Academy. £1,500 to the directors of Nairn Academy, specifically for 6 bursaries for boys attending. The first one was specifically to increase teachers' salaries and to set up a fund, the Dr. Grigor Secondary Education Fund. £1,000 to the Nairn Educational Institute, £1,000 to the Indigent Gentlewomen's Fund, £1,000 for a bursary for a young man to pursue medical studies, to be called the Grigor Medical Bursary, £1,000 to establish a bursary for a young man to go on and pursue. So one is from Nairn and one is from for Elgin children, young people. In all, it says the Grigor bequests to Nairn Town and County came to over £10,000. So well over half, around half of what he had at the time he died went specifically to the poor, the ill, the people of Nairn, particularly around education. And it was used, it mentions there education for boys, but it was used for girls as well. In the months after Dr. Grigor's death, a group came together to plan the erection of a statue of him. Sculpted by John Hutchison RSA, it was unveiled at the corner of the High Street and Leopold Street on the 31st of May 1890, which was declared a half-holiday for the town. At the ceremony, Provost Black of Elgin said, and this is a quote, "He had never known a citizen who was of such value to a town as Dr. Grigor was to Nairn. It was the apple of his eye. He saw the possibilities of its greatness before they were visible to other people, and he laid down for himself and others the lines upon which that greatness could be attained." The statue remained there until 1950, when increasing traffic meant that it had to be moved to Viewfield House, Nairn Museum, and which is where it still is. But what I thought was quite interesting was, I was just like, he probably would have loved that. He would have been all for the fact that progress meant changes had to happen and his statue had to be moved. Quite nice to have that you know that person probably would have been absolutely fine with that decision. If you want to know more about Dr. Grigor, Nairn Museum has a collection relating to him. I would really encourage you to visit them. And also, of course, to Nairn's history generally and the role that he played in that. We also have the collection at the Highland Archive Centre that was used to write that book. And if you really want to know more detail, then of course, Dr. Grigor of Nairn by Ray and Lawson. I hope you've enjoyed that, finding out a little bit about that story. I hope you can join me next week. I will be looking at the MacLeod of Cadboll collection that we hold at the Highland Archive Centre. But in the meantime, a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. If you're able to donate towards our work, we are very grateful for that. Thank you very much for joining me.